The Indiana Fever present a genuine tactical contradiction. This is not a team that simply loses games or struggles on defense. It is a team that periodically generates an offense that looks nearly unguardable, and then, within the same possession, dismantles it. That pattern is worth examining closely. Caitlin Clark is one of the most sophisticated offensive operators women's basketball has produced. Her ability to generate scoring opportunities from distance, to weaponize tempo, and to manipulate spacing through the threat of her passing makes her categorically difficult to scheme against. What made her exceptional at Iowa was not any single skill. It was the speed at which she processed the game, and the willingness to attack before defenses could establish structure. She did not wait for the geometry of a possession to clarify. She bent it. That style of play is built on pace and unpredictability. It functions at its highest level when the players around the primary creator operate with the same sense of urgency, running the floor in transition, cutting before defenders can recover, catching and shooting without hesitation. The offense becomes a compounding problem for the opposing team. One threat multiplies into several, and the time available to address each one shrinks. That is not consistently what is happening in Indiana. There are possessions where Clark retrieves a defensive rebound, advances the ball, and the floor opens in exactly the way it should. Defenders react to her presence. Cutters find space. The pace creates genuine advantage. The offense looks like what it was designed to be, and then the possession slows. Players reset. The ball moves laterally. The defense recovers its shape. The advantage, which existed for perhaps 2 or 3 seconds, is gone. This cycle has repeated throughout the season. What makes it analytically interesting and frustrating for those watching is that the problem does not appear to be talent. The Fever have produced enough of those high-functioning sequences to confirm the offensive capability exists. The difficulty is sustaining it. Organizational identity in basketball matters enormously. Teams that execute consistently tend to have a clear answer to a basic question. What are we, and how do we want to score? The teams that struggle with consistency are frequently the ones caught between competing answers to that question. Indiana reads as a team still working through that internal negotiation. There is an offense that wants to run, fast, aggressive, opportunistic, built on transition and early offense. And there is an offense that defaults to structure, to half-court execution, to controlled possessions and disciplined spacing. Both of those approaches exist within the same roster, and the tension between them surfaces repeatedly throughout games. Stephanie White's coaching tendencies have historically leaned toward control. Measured possessions, defensive accountability, limiting errors. That approach has produced winning basketball before, and there is nothing inherently flawed about it. But the question of fit, whether those tendencies maximize what Clark does best, is legitimate, and it is the question that observers increasingly ask. Clark's most dangerous offensive moments have consistently come when defenses are off balance. She reads those imbalances faster than most players at any level of the sport. When a defender is late rotating, when the floor is spread, when the transition to half-court threshold hasn't yet been reached, that is when she inflicts the most damage. She operates in windows that close quickly, and her value is highest when the offense is structured to keep those windows open. When Indiana slows a possession unnecessarily, those windows close. Defenders, who moments earlier were scrambling, find their footing, help rotations solidify. The advantage dissipates. Opposing defenses appear to have noticed. There is a visible shift in defensive posture when Indiana abandons the early offense and settles into half-court basketball. The urgency drops. Recovery becomes manageable. The pressure that Clark generates through pace is partially neutralized by her own team's pace. Spacing compounds the problem. Clark's offensive value increases dramatically when defenders cannot cheat off other players to crowd driving lanes or deter passes. The more non-shooters Indiana has on the floor at any given moment, the more a defense can concentrate its resources on limiting her. The floor shrinks. The decision window narrows. What looked like an open driving lane or a viable skip pass becomes less viable by the time the ball can arrive. The historical precedent for building around a player of Clark's type is instructive. The organizations that have maximized genuinely transformative offensive creators did not ask those players to adapt to existing systems. They rebuilt the systems. Roster construction changed. The pace of play changed. Shot selection philosophy changed. The entire offensive identity was reconfigured around the reality that one player could alter defensive geometry in ways others could not. That kind of organizational commitment requires accepting certain trade-offs. It usually means allowing some possessions to function at a higher risk level. It means trusting transition basketball even when turnovers occasionally result. It means building a roster specifically around pace and spacing, even if that creates defensive vulnerabilities. Whether Indiana has made that full commitment remains an open question. The evidence from this season suggests the organization is still weighing those trade-offs rather than having resolved them. The personnel decisions, the tactical tendencies, the pace data, all of it points toward a team that has not yet fully committed to either identity. That ambiguity shows up on the floor. Players who might benefit from a clear, singular mandate instead appear to be operating within a more complicated set of instructions. The result is hesitation at moments that should produce decisive action. Watch Clark in the moments after a transition opportunity is abandoned. The body language is readable, the gestures toward teammates, toward the space they should be occupying, communicate something about the gap between what she perceives the possession can generate and what it actually becomes. The point is not that the Fever are dysfunctional. It is that the distance between what this offense occasionally produces and what it produces on average is wider than the talent on the roster would suggest. That gap typically has a structural explanation. Offensive rhythm at the highest level is not simply about having skilled players. It requires a shared and automatic understanding of tempo, when to push, when to set, when to attack early, when to wait. The best offenses produce that understanding across a roster because the system itself enforces it. Everyone operates from the same framework. Movement becomes instinctive rather than considered. Indiana has not yet produced that consistency. The offense thinks where the best offenses react. By the time a decision is consciously processed and executed, the window that made it the right decision has already closed. Clark's primary weapon has never been her shooting alone. It is anticipation. The ability to identify and attack structural vulnerabilities in a defense before those vulnerabilities are apparent to the defense itself. That skill only compounds into team-level advantage when the players around her are moving with the same anticipatory logic. A pass thrown into a space only works if a teammate has already begun moving toward that space. When teammates are waiting for the offense to tell them where to go, rather than operating on the same read, Clark's vision becomes disconnected from the execution. The passes she can see become passes she cannot throw. This is not a question of effort or individual talent. The Fever's roster contains capable players. The question is whether those players have been assembled and coached in a way that is genuinely tailored to Clark's strengths, or whether the organization built a reasonable team and then attempted to integrate a player whose style does not naturally fit the framework that team was designed around. The two paths require different things. A team built for Clark requires pace-compatible personnel, perimeter shooting depth, defenders capable of switching quickly to enable fast transition offense after defensive stops, and a coaching philosophy comfortable with the controlled chaos of early offense. A team built around traditional half-court values requires patience, positional discipline, and comfort operating in slow-set situations. Both can produce good basketball. The combination of the two, applied inconsistently to a player whose value is maximized by one and reduced by the other, is what produces the kind of variance Indiana has shown. There is also the question of what happens psychologically when a player of Clark's caliber repeatedly encounters friction between her instincts and the structure she is asked to operate within. Elite offensive players calibrate their decisions against a feedback mechanism. The results of their decisions tell them what is working and what is not. When the structure interrupts that feedback loop or introduces variables that are not strictly about basketball decision-making, it can affect confidence and rhythm in ways that are difficult to quantify but visibly present. Clark has not regressed as a player, but there are possessions that look tentative in ways her best basketball never did. Whether that is a natural part of adjusting to the professional game or a consequence of operating within a system that imposes friction on her strengths is a distinction that matters going forward. The Fever are not without competitive value. They win games. They produce stretches of genuinely impressive offensive basketball. Clark is already a significant force in the WNBA, and the argument that this team has the pieces to develop into a genuine contender is not unreasonable. But the ceiling of this franchise is determined by a decision the organization has not yet fully made, whether to build entirely around what Clark does best or to continue attempting to balance that against other tactical preferences. That decision will shape not just this season's results, but the arc of what this team eventually becomes. The flashes are there. The capacity for something more consistent is there. What is missing at the moment is the full organizational commitment to build around it without reservation. That commitment is the difference between a team that occasionally looks like a contender and one that actually becomes one.